Nothing better than burning a Christmas tree in the backyard on kind of a gray and cloudy and overcast day. So that's what I'm doing. I'm out here. It is a little chilly, so I'm just throwing one pine bough at a time in here and watching the proverbial fireworks. But this stuff is going great. It's fantastic. It's just kind of nice to be outside and do something. That's one of the things that I grew up with. Speaking of what I grew up with, I had an interesting conversation with a friend 2 days ago. And it revolved around the expectations of work. I grew up in a town in Wyoming that has about 200 people in it. At least that's when I was living there, that's how big it was. Now there's maybe 300. But it was a town nonetheless. All the rest of my relatives lived on ranches in Nebraska, Kansas, wherever else. All of the kids that I went to school with lived on ranches. Even my best friend, who lived just outside of town, like a quarter mile out of town, was on a ranch. You know, when we went and spent time at his house, we did ranch things. We fed bottle calves, spent time in the pasture. He had pigs. I had sheep at one point. It was a very agrarian experience compared to everything that I experience now. I felt at the time a large measure of embarrassment because we, out of all the family members, lived in a city. Everybody else lived somewhere else, like on a farm. And so I felt the embarrassment of that. There was a movie that came out around that time, had Billy Crystal in it, called City Slickers. And I think that kind of embodied how I felt. Like, I had a father also, even though that we lived in a city, and he was a school teacher. During the summer, he would go and he would work and he would farm. And when you farm, it's not an 8 to 5, a 9 to 5. You do the work when the work needs to be done. So if we would go to my Uncle Mark's and he needed help with harvest, then maybe we would go to their house and Dad would help with harvest. And I remember riding around with my cousins and grain trucks driving to town and back at a young age. And I also recall people working long hours and working physically taxing jobs. And I felt embarrassed because of not because of my personal work ethic, but because I didn't have to do any of that. I felt like my life I lived in the lap of luxury, if you will, which is why I think living in places like Charlotte, it's difficult to find people who can identify with that sort of experience. So I also wondered too, to my friend out loud, maybe this also frames my expectations when it comes to work. Because one of the things that I have felt personally over time is that I derive a lot of satisfaction from working hard, understanding my land and knowing all of the different things about it, understanding the flora and the fauna. And I don't think that that's shared by other people who had a different experience growing up. And so for the first time, I had an epiphany, and I just kind of wonder if I'm the only person that feels that way. But my question is then, does the lens of our experience also frame our relationship with work and our expectations of the other people that we work with? Because most of the people that I work with are not people that grew up on ranches or farms. Most of them are people that had childhoods like my son's gonna have, where they just run around a neighborhood. And that's kind of what I had too. But I felt embarrassed by it because I thought the expectation was, doing what I did when I went to my cousin's house, which is filling buckets of grain and going down and feeding calves in the morning and maybe digging lines for a water system up in the hills. All stuff that I never did when I was actually in a city. So great questions. Would love to hear your comments about that. Your experience frame how you think about work now. Hope you guys are having a great day.